The printer beside the examination table spat out a single sheet of paper. At the same moment, my phone vibrated hard enough to rattle against the stainless steel tray. "Leave it for a minute," the nurse said. "I need you to tell me exactly how you fell." I stared at the new scrape, running down the silver shaft of my crutch. The rubber grip was still marked with a faint streak of foundation from Kelsey's hand. My sister took the crutch away while I was using it. The nurse stopped typing. "She took it by accident?" "No." The word came out more quietly than I intended. My knee throbbed beneath the temporary brace. The pain was not as sharp as the first injury, but it spread deeper each time I moved, like something inside the joint had been twisted and warned not to forget. My phone vibrated again. Then again. I reached for it before the nurse could tell me not to. The family group chat had 37 new messages. Kelsey had posted a video. It began with me already off balance. My right arm stretched toward empty air. My father lurched sideways beside me. Then I hit the floor, my dress riding above my knee as 200 wedding guests turned toward the sound. The video did not show Kelsey walking behind me. It did not show her hand closing around my crutch. It did not show her laughing, "Stop pretending to be helpless." Her caption appeared beneath the clip. "Dana tried to ruin Melissa's wedding because nobody was paying attention to her." Again. My mother had added a broken heart emoji. Then she sent me a private message. "Please tell everyone you got dizzy. Melissa waited years for this day. Don't take it away from her." Not "Are you hurt?" Not "What did the doctor say?" Just another version of the same job I had been doing since childhood. Carry the ugly part so the rest of the family could look beautiful. My thumbs hovered over the screen. The familiar apology had already formed in my mind. "I'm sorry things got out of control." I had used those words when Melissa blamed me for making our parents argue. I had used them when Kelsey borrowed money and accused me of embarrassing her by asking when she would repay it. I had used them after my father fell the first time, even though I had been the one who caught him. I looked down at the scrape on my crutch. This time, I closed the message without answering. The nurse slid the printed sheet toward me. "No fracture that we can see, but the joint is inflamed. You need to follow up with orthopedics. And no unnecessary lifting or transfers." A humorless breath escaped me. Unnecessary lifting. For almost 2 years, my family had treated every task involving my father as necessary provided I was the one doing it. There was a soft knock at the open door. Thomas Hale, the groom's father, stood in the hallway with his suit jacket folded over one arm. He had loosened his tie, and his silver hair was damp around the temples. "I won't stay," he said. "Ethan asked me to make sure you got here safely." He placed a business card on the tray beside my phone. "I wrote down what I saw before I left the venue. Kelsey removed your crutch while you were supporting your father. If you need me to confirm that, I will." I looked at him carefully. "What are you planning to do with it?" "Nothing unless you ask me to." That answer mattered more than the offer. My family had spent years making decisions for me, and calling it concern. "Please keep your notes," I said. "Don't contact my family. Don't contact anyone else yet." Thomas nodded once. "You decide." After he left, my phone lit again. Kelsey had tagged an organization in her wedding post. Virginia Family Care Alliance. I knew the name. They sponsored local caregiver workshops, fundraising dinners, and an annual award for relatives who had made extraordinary sacrifices for an aging family member. Beneath the tag, Kelsey had written, "Nobody deserves tomorrow's recognition more than the daughter who truly stayed." Tomorrow's recognition. I enlarged the photograph attached to the post. Melissa stood between my parents, still wearing her wedding gown. My father smiled from his chair. My mother's hand rested proudly on Melissa's shoulder. I was not in the picture. Behind them, on an easel decorated with white roses, stood a poster bearing Melissa's name. Finalist Family Caregiver of the Year. 2 hours earlier, I had still believed the worst thing my family intended to take from me was my balance. I had been wrong. The wedding took place at Bellwether Gardens, a restored estate halfway between Richmond and my parents' home in Henrico County. My mother had called it Melissa's beautiful second beginning, at least 12 times before the ceremony. Melissa was 50. Her first marriage had ended 8 years earlier in a divorce public enough to become gossip among my mother's church friends. Since her engagement to Ethan, my mother had treated the wedding like a chance to correct the family record. "This is the ending people will remember," she had said while inspecting the reception tables that morning. I should have known that meant she would protect it at any cost. By the time photographs began, my knee was already swelling under my dress. I had spent most of the afternoon helping my father. Robert Brooks had once been a high school principal who could silence an auditorium simply by stepping onto a stage. After a mild stroke and months of inconsistent rehabilitation, he could still stand and walk short distances, but transfers required patience and attention. Melissa liked being photographed beside him. I handled everything that happened between the photographs. "His evening medication is in the front pocket," my mother said, pressing a canvas bag into my free hand. "And I brought the blue cushion, but I don't know which chair it goes on. You've been using it at home for 6 months. She looked toward the flower arch, instead of at me. "You know how your father likes things." That was the sentence she used whenever she meant, "You do it." I hooked the medication bag over my wrist and wedged the cushion against my hip. My right hand held the crutch. My left arm supported my father's elbow as he prepared to move from the transport chair into a padded reception chair. Across the lawn, Melissa laughed while 3 women congratulated her. "You've been incredible with your dad," one of them said. Melissa lowered her eyes modestly. "Family comes first." My father heard her. His mouth curved into a smile. I waited for him to look at me. He did not. "Dana," my mother said sharply, "your father is trying to stand." I tightened my grip beneath his elbow. 1, 2, 3. My father pushed himself upright. His weight shifted toward me for a second before he found his feet. I had done this hundreds of times before the injury. The scar beneath my dress came from the night an agency aide had failed to arrive. My mother had claimed she could not help because her back hurt. Melissa had said she was at an important networking dinner. My father had tried to reach the bathroom without assistance. When his knees buckled, I had stepped between him and the tile floor. He stayed upright. I did not. The surgery had repaired most of the damage, but rehabilitation was slow, and the brace beneath my dress was a reminder that competence did not make a body indestructible. "Can you take a picture without that thing?" Kelsey asked. I turned my head. My younger sister stood a few feet away, holding her phone horizontally. She wore a pale green bridesmaid dress and the irritated expression of someone whose perfect shot had been ruined by an object. "What thing?" "The crutch." "No." She lowered the phone. "You stood by yourself in the restroom. For a few seconds beside the sink. So you don't need it every second." "I need it now." My father was still gripping my forearm. His balance had not settled completely. Kelsey glanced toward Melissa, then back at me. "You know she wants one normal family picture. Then take one, without you looking like a patient." The insult landed, but I did not answer. I had learned that explaining pain to my sisters only gave them more material. I shifted my crutch slightly and focused on my father. "Are you steady?" He nodded. Kelsey moved away. At least, I thought she did. I felt the pull before I understood it. The crutch vanished from beneath my hand. My entire weight dropped toward the unsupported side of my body. My father's arm tightened around mine as he began to tilt with me. Someone shouted. I tried to release him so I would not drag him down, but the medication bag had tangled around my wrist. My knee folded. The ground struck my hip first. Then my palm. Then the side of my knee. A reception chair scraped violently across the stone terrace as an employee caught my father from behind. For half a second, the entire garden seemed to stop breathing. Then voices rose from every direction. "Oh my God. What happened? Call someone." Ethan stepped away from the stage. "Kelsey, what did you do?" "She got dizzy," Kelsey said immediately. I looked toward her. My crutch lay near her feet. "I didn't eat," she continued, speaking loudly enough for the closest tables to hear. Dana does this when her blood sugar drops. I had never been diagnosed with a blood sugar condition. Melissa arrived before I could push myself upright. "Everyone, please give her space," she called. "She gets overwhelmed when there's too much attention." Her smile was tense but still fixed in place. Dana, don't make this worse. Just breathe. Kelsey lifted her phone again. She's fine. She's being dramatic. The two explanations contradicted each other, sick enough to collapse, manipulative enough to stage it, but the guests had not all seen what happened. Most had turned only after I hit the ground. Some moved toward me. Others stepped back as Melissa instructed, assuming she knew something they did not. That was how gaslighting worked best in my family. Not by telling one perfect lie, but by flooding the room with enough explanations that nobody knew which question to ask first. Ethan motioned to the band. Stop the music. Melissa turned toward him. There's no reason to alarm everyone. Your sister is on the ground. She does this. The words were quiet, but I heard them. So did Thomas. He had already crossed the terrace and knelt beside me. Before retiring, he had spent more than 30 years as a home health nurse. He did not touch me immediately. Dana, can you tell me where the pain is? My right knee. Did you hit your head? No. Did you feel faint before you fell? No. Kelsey made an impatient sound. She was leaning all over Dad. She lost her balance. Thomas looked past me. My crutch was still lying several feet away, its handle pointing toward Kelsey. How did that get there? Nobody answered. When Thomas helped me adjust my dress, the fabric caught above my knee, exposing the pale surgical scar running down the side of the joint. His expression changed. That scar isn't from tonight. No. He looked at my father, then at Melissa. Who did this to her? Melissa's face lost color so quickly that even from the ground, I saw it. The music remained silent. My father sat in the chair an employee had pulled behind him. He was watching the flower arrangements near the stage with unnatural concentration. I waited. He had seen the injury happen months earlier. He knew why I needed surgery. He knew which daughter had been at the house and which one had canceled. All he had to say was one sentence. Dana was hurt helping me. His eyes never reached mine. Melissa recovered first. She had an accident, she said. This isn't the time. Thomas looked back at the crutch. It became the time when someone took away her support. A few guests began whispering. Kelsey crossed her arms. She can stand. I've seen her. Ethan stepped between Kelsey and me. You took it? I was proving a point. What point? That she's exaggerating. My mother pushed through the small circle forming around us. For heaven's sake, everyone is staring. She bent toward me, lowering her voice. Can you get up if we help you? I need the crutch. She retrieved it and tried to place it in my hand before Thomas stopped her. Wait until she's assessed. My mother's lips tightened. This is Melissa's wedding. Thomas stared at her. I'm aware. I placed one hand against the stone and pushed myself into a seated position. The pain was sharp, but what I felt most clearly was humiliation. The old hot instinct to make everyone comfortable by pretending I was fine. Melissa glanced toward the guests. Could the band start again? Please? Dana just needs some air. Ethan shook his head. Not yet. A venue employee asked whether they should call an ambulance. I can go to urgent care, I said. But first, I want an incident report. My mother blinked. A what? An incident report. With the correct sequence of events. Kelsey laughed once. Of course you do. I looked at the manager. My sister removed my crutch while I was supporting my father. I fell immediately afterward. Melissa stepped closer. That is not what happened. It is what happened to me. You were already unstable. Then taking the crutch would have been even more dangerous. For once, she had no quick response. The manager held out a clipboard. The first handwritten description said, Guest became dizzy and lost balance during photographs. I crossed out the sentence. Kelsey's mouth fell open. I wrote beneath it. My crutch was removed from my hand without my consent while I was using it to support my weight and assist my father. I fell immediately afterward. Then I signed my name. My hand shook, but the letters were legible. My mother tried to lead me toward a side corridor. The kitchen exit is closer. I'm leaving through the front. Dana, don't turn this into a spectacle. I looked toward the 200 guests who had already watched me fall. I didn't. With Thomas walking a respectful step behind me and a venue employee carrying my bag, I left through the main entrance. Near the gift table, A poster decorated with white roses caught my attention. Melissa's smiling face occupied the center. Under it were the words, Virginia Family Care Alliance, Family Caregiver, of the Year finalist. The photograph showed Melissa kneeling beside my father, one hand resting over his. The blue care binder sat open on the table behind them. It was nearly 10 when I returned to my apartment in Richmond. My parents lived only 20 minutes away in Henrico. For almost 2 years, that distance had allowed my family to treat me like an extension of their house. I could leave the hospital at 5:30, check my father's medication before 6, heat his dinner, update his appointments, and still be back in my apartment before 8. They called that convenience love. I set my crutch beside the kitchen table and took the blue binder from the bottom shelf of a locked cabinet. The cover had softened with use. A brown coffee stain spread across the lower corner from a night my father's blood pressure had dropped, and my mother had knocked over my cup while reaching for the phone. The smell of old paper pulled me back to that kitchen. My father sitting beneath the harsh overhead light. My mother standing in the doorway. "I can't look at all those pills," she had said. "I'm afraid I'll give him the wrong one." I had sorted them according to the paper medication list the discharge nurse had handed me in my father's room. Melissa had arrived, carrying soup from a restaurant. She had placed the container beside Dad, taken a photograph, and left before the medication alarm sounded. The next morning, my mother posted the picture online. Melissa always knows exactly what her father needs. I opened the binder. The first page read, "Current meds," in my handwriting. I updated that sheet whenever a medication changed, then kept the older monthly records behind separate tabs. It was a simple system, current information in front, history behind it. Melissa had once asked to photograph several pages, for insurance. At the time, I had been relieved she wanted to help. Now I wondered what she had actually photographed. I turned to the week of my original injury. A home care aide had been scheduled for Thursday evening. The employee's name had been crossed out. Beside the line, someone had written, "Family Handling Transfer." Not my handwriting. I called Ana Morales. She had coordinated my father's home care visits before moving to another agency. She answered on the 4th ring. "Dana, it's late. Is everything all right?" "No, but I need to ask you a procedural question." That made her pause. "What kind?" "If a home care shift disappears from a schedule, is there always a record of who canceled it? I can't discuss your father's service history with you. I'm not asking you to tell me what happened. You're asking whether a record exists." "Yes." Another pause. "A visit does not cancel itself," she said carefully. "There would be a request, a reason, and a time. Could I request it?" "Not directly, unless your father authorized it or the request came through an organization he had already given permission to verify information." My eyes moved to the photograph of Melissa's award poster on my phone. What if he signed a consent form for an award application? If the form specifically allows verification of caregiving claims, the review committee might be able to request limited confirmation. Anna's tone softened. "Dana, use only what belongs to you or what was officially given to you. Do not look at anything through work." "I won't." I meant it. I knew exactly how quickly a justified suspicion could become professional misconduct if I used access I did not legally have. After the call, I scanned my handwritten pages, the discharge summary, and the paper medication list. I stored the copies in a secured folder and placed the originals back into a locking document box. Before closing the binder, I noticed the holes along 3 monthly pages. The paper around them was torn. The pages had been removed and put back. The next morning, Melissa posted her wedding thank you message. There were photographs of the garden, the cake, and my parents dancing. Then came a picture of a care calendar. At the top, in decorative lettering, were the words, "Melissa Hale, Robert Brooks' primary family caregiver." The calendar used my symbols. A triangle for medication changes, a small circle for therapy days, a line beneath any dose that needed to be rechecked. My stomach tightened. Kelsey reposted the video of my fall. Some people will do anything when they see their sister being honored. My phone rang before I could enlarge the calendar image. It was Leah, my manager at the hospital. Her voice was calm, which frightened me more than anger would have. Dana, compliance received a complaint this morning. About what? It alleges that you performed an unsafe family transfer while physically unable to support the person involved. My fingers went cold around the phone. It's about my father. The complaint includes a video and a signed statement. Whose signature? I can't send the entire submission yet, but the statement is attributed to Robert Brooks. For a moment, the room seemed to narrow around me. Leah continued. This is fact-finding, not discipline. You'll keep your position and salary. But until the initial review is complete, you're being moved away from direct transfer safety instruction. I looked at the project folder on my table. For 4 months, I had been building a discharge education program for families caring for stroke patients at home. When does that start? Today. And the education project? I have to assign the live training portion to someone else. The pain in my knee faded behind something colder. How long? About 10 working days, assuming we receive everything promptly. I'll cooperate. I expected you would. I also want the audit log checked. Leah went quiet. You want compliance to verify whether you accessed your father's chart? Yes. I haven't. I want that documented. All right. And I'll provide only my own medical record and the paper instructions that were given to me as his caregiver. That's the correct boundary. When the call ended, I opened the portion of the complaint Leah was permitted to send me. The language was familiar. Dana Brooks frequently exaggerated her role in her father's care. Despite limited involvement and her own mobility restrictions, she attempted a transfer without appropriate assistance. At the bottom was a reference to supporting documentation. See attached Family Caregiver of the Year nomination, approved by Robert Brooks. The complaint had not been written after the wedding video went online. The file properties showed it had been created the day before. The story had been prepared before Kelsey took my crutch. After work, I drove from Richmond to my parents' house in Henrico. The trip took 22 minutes. I knew because I spent every one of them rehearsing a single question. What did you sign? My key still opened the front door. My mother appeared in the hallway before I had fully stepped inside. You should have called. I emailed. We've been busy cleaning up the mess from last night. From the kitchen came the soft electronic chime of my father's medication alarm. My mother looked toward the sound. Then she looked at me. You know which box he needs. The instructions are on the refrigerator. Her face changed. Not dramatically, just a small tightening around the mouth. Dana, don't be childish. I came to ask Dad a question. Melissa entered from the dining room, wearing jeans and one of Ethan's college sweatshirts. You shouldn't be here. Dad gave me a key. That doesn't mean you can barge in whenever you want. My father sat at the dining table with a blanket across his knees. He looked tired but alert. I placed a printed page in front of him. Did you sign an award nomination for Melissa? He glanced at the page, then at my mother. I signed a few papers thanking your sister. What did those papers say about me? Melissa leaned against the back of a chair. This is exactly why nobody wanted to involve you. I ignored her. Dad, did the nomination say I rarely came here? He rubbed one thumb along the edge of the blanket. It said Melissa kept the family together. That wasn't my question. My mother opened the refrigerator, took out the medication organizer and held it toward me. Can we do this after your father takes his pills? You're holding the organizer. I don't know which compartment. It says Monday evening. Dana. The way she said my name held years of expectation. I did not take the box. Melissa stepped forward. Kelsey will delete the video if you stop contacting the award committee. The room became very still. I had not told them I planned to contact the committee. You think those things are connected, I said. I think you're trying to punish me because one day wasn't about you. You'll remove a false video if I agree not to challenge your caregiver nomination. It's not false. Kelsey took my crutch. You were already falling. My father remained silent. I looked at him. Who managed your evening medication last year? His gaze lowered. Who attended discharge teaching? No answer. Who was injured when the scheduled aide didn't arrive? My mother placed the medication organizer loudly on the counter. If you stop coming, I'll have to do all of this myself. There it was. Not concern for my father. Not confusion. The cost she had spent years assigning to me. I cannot do the nights, she continued. I cannot turn this house into a hospital. You know how hard this has been for me. I looked at Melissa. You want the title. Then I looked at my mother. You want the labor to remain mine. That is a hateful thing to say. It is an accurate thing to say. My father finally spoke. Melissa has done more for this family than you understand. Then why does she need my calendar? His head lifted. Melissa's eyes narrowed. I had my answer before anyone spoke. I stepped back toward the hallway. From now on, anything about Dad's care comes to me in writing. My mother stared at me. You're leaving before he takes his medication? You have the written instructions. Dana, if something happens, call the care line printed on the refrigerator. Melissa folded her arms. So dramatic. I opened the door. No, documented. I left before they could order me out. From my car, I sent an email summarizing the questions I had asked and the answers I had not received. Melissa replied, within 3 minutes. Dad signed because it was the truth. That night, I contacted the Virginia Family Care Alliance. I did not accuse Melissa of fraud. I did not send my father's medication list. I wrote one precise request. My name and an allegation concerning my conduct appear in a nomination submitted to your organization. I am requesting the opportunity to review and correct statements referring directly to me. An hour later, a committee administrator responded. Because the nomination contained claims about my actions, I was entitled to receive the relevant sections and request a confidential review. The attached pages loaded one at a time. Melissa's photograph. A summary of her sacrifices. A reconstructed care calendar. Then the paragraph about me. Robert's middle daughter, Dana, was seldom available. During one of her infrequent visits, she attempted to move him without appropriate assistance, causing a fall and further disruption to his recovery. Melissa assumed full responsibility afterward. My hands stopped moving. Below the paragraph was my father's signature. I enlarged it. The slant of the R. The narrow loop in the B. The slight break before the final S. It was real. On the next page was a consent authorizing the committee to verify caregiving claims with listed service providers. He had signed that too. My father had not been confused. Melissa had not forged his name. He had chosen a version in which my injury became her sacrifice. I placed the nomination beside my urgent care note and the old paper medication list. For years, I had believed my father's silence meant he lacked the courage to defend me. The signature told me something worse. He had not failed to choose. He had chosen them. At the bottom of the committee email was a button. Request formal review. I pressed it. I had gone to the wedding, determined not to embarrass my family. 3 hours later, I asked an independent committee to examine the lie my father had signed his name beneath. Part 2. The father who chose the version. The confirmation email arrived before sunrise. Your request for formal review has been accepted. Supporting material must be submitted within 72 hours. 72 hours sounded generous until I began listing everything that had to happen inside them. I needed to protect my position at the hospital. I needed to prove the care calendar had not been created when Melissa claimed it was. I needed to answer the allegations without exposing my father's private medical information or giving anyone a reason to question my professional ethics. Most of all, I needed to stop treating every painful detail as evidence simply because it hurt. By 6:30, the wall above my dining table held 3 columns of yellow notes. The first was labeled, What I Know. Kelsey had removed my crutch. The video posted online began after she touched it. My father had signed the nomination. The nomination said I rarely visited. The care calendar used my symbols. The second column read, What can be verified? The time the complaint was created. The date each medication appeared on the paper list. The canceled home care visit. The source of the calendar pages. The third column was the smallest. What I suspect. Melissa had copied my binder. Kelsey had taken my crutch to create a useful video. My mother had known about the nomination before the wedding. My father had chosen to erase my work because preserving Melissa's image benefited him. The last suspicion felt true enough to leave a taste in my mouth. It was still a suspicion. I pulled the note down and placed it on the table. Truth did not become stronger because I rushed it. At 8, I carried my laptop, the urgent care record, and a folder of paper discharge instructions into a private conference room at the hospital. Leah was already waiting. A legal pad rested in front of her. Beside it sat a sealed envelope from compliance. My usual badge still opened the room. That small fact steadied me. "Before we start," Leah said, "this is an initial fact-finding process. You have not been disciplined. I understand. You are not accused of harming a patient here. Not yet." Her pen stopped. "That distinction matters, Dana. So does the complaint being written to sound as if my work and my father's care are the same thing." Leah studied me for a moment, then slid a consent form across the table. "This authorizes information security to review whether your account accessed Robert Brooks's chart." I read every line. The review would cover the previous 12 months. It would include direct access, searches, proxy access, and any printed material associated with my credentials. Signing it should not have frightened me. I knew I had never opened his chart. Still, my fingers tightened around the pen. A system log was not interested in intentions. It recorded clicks, searches, and access paths. One careless action months earlier could look different when removed from context. I thought back through every shift. Robert had never been admitted to my hospital during that period. His rehabilitation had been coordinated through another health system. His name might have appeared in emails from my mother, but not in a patient record I could reach through work. The pen touched paper. "I want the audit completed," I said. "And I want the result included in the file." Leah nodded. "That is what I would advise." The signature came out steady. Next, I opened the urgent care note documenting my knee injury. "This is mine," I said. "I can provide it voluntarily." Leah read the first page. "It supports the timing. It does not prove why I was injured the first time. It only shows that the injury existed before the award nomination and that last night aggravated it." Good. Her approval irritated me. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because part of me wanted someone to say the documents already proved everything. I wanted relief before the process had earned it. Instead, Leah asked, "What else do you intend to submit?" The discharge summary and medication instructions that were handed to me in my father's room when he named me as the person receiving home care teaching. I have the original paper copies. No electronic records? No. No screenshots from a clinical portal? No. No access through your position here? I have not opened anything connected to him through this hospital or any other system. That needs to remain true. It will. Leah placed the complaint summary beside my papers. "The anonymous submission claims you attempted an unsafe transfer while physically impaired. I was injured during the transfer they are describing. The person who submitted this included the wedding video as evidence that you use a mobility aid inconsistently. A person can stand for a few seconds and still need a crutch. I know. The complaint writer either doesn't or pretends not to." Leah turned the summary over. "There is another issue. The document metadata had been preserved when the complaint was uploaded. The file had been created late Friday afternoon. The wedding had taken place Saturday. For several seconds, the hum of the ventilation system was the only sound in the room. The complaint existed before I fell," I said. "Yes. They were already planning to challenge my competence. That is a reasonable conclusion from the creation date. We still do not know who drafted it." The yellow note I had removed from the wall seemed to reappear in my mind. Kelsey taking the crutch had felt impulsive. Petty. A sister trying to embarrass another sister. Now, the movement carried a different shape. If they already had a complaint saying I was physically incapable of safely helping my father, a video of me falling could be made to support it. If the video also showed me standing afterward, they could use the same footage to claim I exaggerated the injury. Either version placed me at fault. My knee began to ache beneath the brace. Leah closed the envelope. "Until the preliminary review is complete, you will remain assigned to discharge coordination, documentation, and interdisciplinary planning. You will not conduct live transfer safety demonstrations." "And the education project?" "I assigned tomorrow's session to Mark. 4 months of work had just moved into someone else's calendar. I understand. You are allowed to be angry, I'm aware, but you cannot contact the anonymous complainant through hospital channels. I won't. Do not contact your father's providers as an employee. I won't. Do not send the review committee any information you do not have the right to share. I know. The repeated warnings pressed against the inside of my skull. I know what the rules are, Leah. Her expression softened without becoming pitying. That is why the complaint is dangerous. It takes the thing you are careful about and suggests you were careless. The observation struck more deeply than the temporary reassignment. My relatives had not simply accused me of being a bad daughter. They had chosen the exact failure that could discredit the skill I had built my adult life around. When the meeting ended, I returned to my desk and removed my name from the transfer workshop schedule. Mark stopped beside my cubicle. Leah said I'm covering tomorrow. Yes. Did something happen? A complaint is being reviewed. His eyes moved briefly to the crutch beside my chair. Is it connected to the video? So the clip had already traveled beyond the people tagged in the post. I can't discuss the review. Right, sorry. He walked away carrying the presentation packet I had written. For the first time that morning, I wanted to cry. Instead, I opened the committee email and read the consent language my father had signed. He had authorized the Virginia Family Care Alliance to verify claims about his caregiving schedule with the service providers listed in Melissa's nomination. Robert had believed verification would support her. That signature might be the only reason the canceled home care visit could be confirmed without anyone breaking a privacy rule. By noon, I had drafted a request asking the committee to obtain limited confirmation directly from the agency. I did not ask for my father's entire service file. I asked 3 questions. Was a visit scheduled on the date of my injury? Was it canceled? Who made the cancellation request? Before sending it, I called Anna. She agreed to meet after work at a coffee shop near the river. The place was nearly empty when I arrived. Rain had started, tapping lightly against the front windows. Anna sat at a corner table with 2 paper cups and a folded packet between them. You look exhausted, she said. That's becoming a popular observation. She pushed 1 cup toward me. It's tea, not coffee. You remembered. You once lectured an entire case conference about how caffeine after 6 affected your sleep. I did not lecture. You used slides. Despite myself, I smiled. Then I saw the packet. What is that? Public information from the Alliance website. Review procedures, consent language, and contact instructions. Nothing from the home care agency. Nothing confidential. Disappointment rose too quickly. Anna saw it. You knew I could not bring you an internal log. I knew, but you hoped I would. My hand closed around the warm cup. Yes. Why? Because every hour I spend waiting gives them more time to make their version look official. And if I hand you a protected record because we used to work together, what does that make their argument about your professional boundaries look like? The question made me look away. Traffic moved slowly beyond the rain-streaked glass. They would say I used my connections. They would be right. I know. Anna unfolded the packet. Robert's consent allows the committee to request limited verification from the providers listed in the nomination. They have to make the request. The agency has to answer them. You do not get the record. But I can ask the committee to obtain it. Yes. And you can respond if the agency assigns the verification to you? If I am the appropriate person and the request comes through the correct channel. You cannot tell me now whether Melissa canceled the visit. No. The answer felt like a door closing. Then Anna touched 1 paragraph in the public rules. The nomination refers to Melissa as the primary daughter caregiver, correct? Yes. That wording matters. Why? Anna chose her words slowly. A cancellation request would include how the caller identified herself. The committee can ask the agency to verify the exact role the caller claimed. The teacup paused halfway to my mouth. Are you saying the person who canceled used that phrase? I am saying you should ask the committee to verify whether the caller identified herself as the primary daughter caregiver. Not a disclosure. A direction toward the right question. My father had signed a nomination using those exact words. Melissa's public calendar used them. If the same phrase appeared in the cancellation log from the morning of my injury, the pieces would connect without Anna handing me anything she was not allowed to share. I opened my laptop. Anna leaned back. "You are doing it now?" "Yes." The request was revised at the table. I asked the committee to obtain confirmation of the scheduled visit, the time of cancellation, the caller's stated relationship, and the reason given. When the form asked what the information would establish, I wrote, whether the nominee canceled professional assistance and represented herself as the primary caregiver on the date another relative was injured, performing the uncovered task. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence. "Too strong?" I asked. "No. It says what the answer could establish. It does not claim you already know the answer." I submitted it. Anna wrapped both hands around her cup. "What outcome are you asking for?" "For them to admit I did the work." "That is not an outcome the committee can guarantee." "I know. Then what do you need?" The question was simple enough to expose how tangled my motives still were. Part of me wanted Melissa to stand before everyone who had praised her and say my name. Part of me wanted my father to take back his signature. Part of me wanted my mother to understand how many nights she had slept because I had been awake. None of those things could be ordered by a committee. "The record says I was rarely present," I said. "It says I hurt him because I did not know what I was doing. I need those claims removed." Anna nodded. "That is specific. And I need the hospital to see that the complaint was built from false information. That is a separate process." "I know. You will have to carry the result from one process into the other yourself." "I know that too." This time, the words did not sound defensive. They sounded like a plan. My phone buzzed on the table. An email from the committee had arrived. They had approved the limited verification request. Attached was the portion of Melissa's evidence package I was entitled to challenge. The care calendar filled 36 pages. At first glance, it looked meticulous. Each month had color-coded appointments, medication checks, therapy sessions, and notes about my father's mobility. Melissa's initials appeared at the bottom of almost every page. I enlarged January. The medication list looked familiar. Tout familiar. It was not merely arranged like mine. It was mine. The same order. The same abbreviations. The same unusual placement of a blood pressure medication between two unrelated entries because I had added it in the available space. The name of a newer medication appeared near the bottom. My attention sharpened. That drug had not been part of my father's regimen in January. I knew because the paper medication list from his discharge teaching did not include it. A later update, handed to me months afterward, showed it being added in April. Melissa's January page listed the April medication as though he had been taking it all winter. February showed the same thing. So did March. It was not a random medication error. She had copied the current list backward. At the front of my binder, the page labeled Current Meds always showed the most recent regimen. Whenever something changed, I replaced that page and moved the older list behind the appropriate monthly tab. Someone unfamiliar with the system could photograph the front page in April and assume it applied to every earlier month. Melissa had not reconstructed a year of care from her own notes. She had taken one current page and spread it backward across time. Another copied detail appeared in February. A small double circle beside one dose, my shorthand for recheck after 2 hours. I had not used that symbol before completing a professional update course in March. My training certificate could establish the date without revealing anything private about my father. Anna watched my face. "What did you find?" "The calendar wasn't recorded month by month." "How can you tell?" She copied the current medication sheet into the earlier months. "Can you prove when the list changed?" "With paper instructions that were handed to me, and I can prove when I started using one of the symbols she copied." Anna did not smile. Neither did I. The discovery was too important to celebrate. A reconstructed calendar did not automatically prove Melissa had done nothing. It did prove the document had been presented in a misleading way. The committee had described it as contemporaneous. It was not. Back at my apartment, I placed the paper lists in chronological order. January discharge instructions. An update from April. A second revision from summer. Each page contained a printed date and a handwritten note showing it had been reviewed with me. Beside them, I opened Melissa's calendar on the laptop. The newer medication appeared 3 months too early. My symbol appeared 1 month before I had learned to use it. The error was not hidden. It had simply been disguised by neat formatting and confidence. At the bottom of the final page, a typed line read, "Calendar reviewed and approved by Robert Brooks." My father had not only signed the nomination, he had approved the reconstructed calendar. The phone rang before I could decide what that meant. His name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice. Then I answered, "Hello. Your mother says you are refusing to come over." His voice was level and controlled, the same voice he once used when calling students into his office. I said, "Communication about your care needs to be in writing. I am speaking to you now." "Yes. You contacted the award committee. I requested a review of statements made about me. You are humiliating your sister. The nomination says I caused you to fall. You made mistakes." "What mistake did I make that night?" A pause followed. "You tried to do too much by yourself. The scheduled aid was cancelled. That was not your sister's fault." "Who cancelled the visit?" "I do not keep track of every phone call." Melissa submitted a calendar, saying she kept track of every medication, appointment, and transfer. She did more than you give her credit for. What did she do that week? She was dealing with important commitments, which means she was not there. You always do this. Do what? Reduce everything to dates and boxes. You turn care into an accounting exercise. Because dates tell me who was present. Care is more than paperwork. Yes. It is also being there when someone's knees buckle. His breathing changed, not from distress, but from irritation. I recognized the rhythm. He was preparing to end the conversation while making the ending sound like my choice. Before he could, I asked, "Did you read the calendar before approving it?" "I reviewed what Melissa gave me." "Did you see that the same medication list was copied into every month?" "I am not discussing my prescriptions with you. You made them part of the nomination." "No. Your sister documented her work." "Then why does her calendar use my symbols?" "You brought that binder into the house every time you came. You were always hovering over it, marking every pill and appointment as if nobody else could understand anything." The sentence landed with such precision that I stopped breathing for a second. "Every time I came, always marking." He had just contradicted the statement bearing his signature. The nomination said I was seldom present. His own anger had placed me in the house repeatedly, carrying the binder and managing the schedule. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For answering the question." I did not answer anything. "You confirmed that I brought the binder regularly and tracked the medication changes. That is not the same as caring for someone." "Then who used the information after I wrote it?" He did not respond. In the background, my mother said something too low for me to understand. Then her voice came closer to the phone. "Dana, your father has barely eaten. Has he been evaluated?" "He is upset." "That is not the same as being medically unwell. He needs stability. He needs a care plan that does not depend on me being available every night." "What are we supposed to do?" "Use the agency number on the refrigerator. Call his primary care office if there is a clinical concern." "Your sister does not know the medication schedule," my father said. The words came from farther away, as though he had turned toward my mother rather than the phone. Then he raised his voice. "You cannot abandon us just to prove a point." A strange quiet opened inside me. Not numbness. Clarity. "You signed a document saying Melissa managed the schedule. She has responsibilities. So do I. You are my daughter. And you are the person who signed a statement threatening my career." My mother cut in. "Nobody is threatening your career. You always make everything sound worse." "Compliance removed me from a training project this morning." Neither of them spoke. The absence of surprise told me more than sympathy would have. "You knew the complaint had been filed," I said. My mother recovered first. "We knew Melissa was protecting herself." "From what?" "From you trying to destroy this opportunity." A draft email sat open on my laptop. I placed the call on speaker and began typing. "Starting tonight, I will not provide unscheduled medication management, evening supervision, or transfer assistance. I will send the agency contact information again. Any request for me to resume those duties must come through a written care plan with defined responsibilities." My father's voice hardened. If you continue with this review, do not expect to walk back into my house as my daughter. The old fear arrived exactly when expected. It lived below reason, in the part of me that still remembered waiting outside his study after school, hoping he would call me in and tell me I had done well. For years, the threat of losing my place had worked because I believed that place could eventually become safe. Now his signature lay on my table. You may decide who enters your house, I said. You do not decide whether the things you signed are true. Dana, I am sending the care contacts now. Melissa does not know the medication schedule, he repeated. You know that. Yes. This time, I let the answer stand between us. Then, I ended the call. The follow-up email contained no accusation. It summarized the conversation, listed the agency phone number, and stated the boundary I had set. Before sending it, I added one sentence. During our call, Robert stated that Melissa does not know his medication schedule, despite the nomination identifying her as the primary caregiver responsible for medication management. My finger remained over the trackpad. A private call between father and daughter was not enough to decide the review. It was still a change in the landscape. He had begun contradicting the story faster than I could challenge it. I sent the email. An hour later, Kelsey posted the longer wedding video. The clip began several seconds earlier than the first one. It showed my hand under my father's elbow. It showed me shifting my weight onto the crutch. It showed Kelsey approaching from behind. Her fingers closed around the handle. She pulled. The caption claimed the longer version proved I could stand without assistance because I pushed myself upright after falling. Kelsey had been so focused on the ending that she had published the beginning. I saved the link and downloaded the copy the venue manager sent in response to my incident report. Then I wrote to the committee. The attached video was publicly posted by the person who removed my mobility aid. It shows the sequence immediately before the fall. I am submitting it only to address the claim that I collapsed without external interference. No speech about malice. No demand that strangers condemn her. Only sequence. Thomas's written statement arrived shortly afterward. He described where he had been standing, what he had seen, and why my brief ability to rise did not establish that I could safely bear weight without support. He did not diagnose me. He did not speculate about Kelsey's motive. He simply confirmed that the crutch had been removed before I fell. By midnight, the evidence packet had been reduced to 5 sections. The original binder and numbered scans. The paper discharge summary and medication lists. The committee's verification request to the home care agency. My own treatment record, the venue incident report, and Thomas's statement. The nomination signed by my father. Everything else stayed out. The old birthday insults. The photographs that excluded me. My mother's years of calling only when something needed to be done. All of it explained why the betrayal hurt. None of it was necessary to prove the calendar was reconstructed. Anna called as I was labeling the final folder. The committee contacted the agency, she said. Were you assigned the response? Yes. Can you tell me what you sent? No. Right. They will provide it to the parties according to the review process. Understood. A trace of warmth entered her voice. You asked the correct question. That was all she offered. It was enough. The hospital sent the preliminary audit result the next morning. No access to Robert Brooks's records had been made through my credentials. I printed the statement and placed it in the separate compliance folder. It did not belong in the award review. The committee was not responsible for deciding whether I had violated hospital policy. 2 processes. 2 purposes. My job was to keep them from being twisted together, while still allowing the truth from one to inform the other through the proper channel. Leah stopped at my desk late that afternoon. Information security found no inappropriate access. I received the notice. Compliance still has to finish its review. I know. The result from the caregiver committee may be submitted as supporting material once it exists. I will submit it myself. That is the correct route. The words no longer felt like warnings. They felt like rails keeping me on a path my relatives could not dismiss as retaliation. When I returned home, an email from the Alliance waited in my inbox. The subject line read, Confidential Review Agenda. The meeting would take place the following afternoon, one day before the award ceremony. Melissa would speak first. My father had requested time to support her statement. Anna would appear only to answer questions regarding the agency's verification. My name appeared last. The agenda described my role in 6 words. Responding party challenging nominees supporting record. Beneath the schedule was an attachment listing the first item of business. Statement from nominee Melissa Hale, supported by Robert Brooks. I read the line twice. My father had already signed the lie. Now he intended to repeat it while looking directly at me. I closed the laptop and placed the original blue binder inside my document case. Tomorrow, I would find out whether he could keep his version intact once every date was placed in front of him. Part 3. The trophy that was never awarded. The next afternoon, the blue binder felt heavier than it had at any point during my father's recovery. Nothing inside had changed overnight. The paper still smelled faintly of coffee. The plastic dividers still curled at the edges. My handwriting still grew tighter on the days when I had worked a full shift at the hospital before driving to Henrico. What had changed was the purpose of carrying it. For nearly 2 years, the binder had been proof that I was useful enough to be allowed near my father. Now it was evidence that usefulness and love had never been the same thing. The Virginia Family Care Alliance occupied the 2nd floor of a renovated brick building near downtown Richmond. A framed photograph of past award recipients hung beside the elevator. Most of them stood with elderly parents or spouses, smiling beneath captions about sacrifice, endurance, and devotion. Melissa's photograph had been prepared for that wall. The thought no longer made my stomach turn. It made me look more carefully at the document case in my hand. Anna was waiting outside the conference room. She wore a navy blazer and carried no folder of her own. "Do you want me beside you?" she asked. The question held no assumption. "Sit behind me," I said. "Please answer only what they ask about the agency." That was my plan. "I know." She glanced at the crutch, tucked beneath my arm. "How is the knee?" "Angry." "That is a clinical term now?" "It is in my apartment." The corner of her mouth lifted. Footsteps approached from the elevator. Melissa arrived first, wearing a cream-colored suit with pearl buttons. Her hair had been styled in the same polished waves she had worn for the rehearsal dinner. A garment bag hung from one hand. The outfit for tomorrow's awards ceremony, I realized. She had brought it with her. My mother followed, carrying an oversized leather purse and the expression she used before church events when she expected everyone to behave. My father came behind them with a cane. He was walking rather than using the transport chair, though each step required visible concentration. For an instant, instinct took over. My attention went to the placement of his cane, the position of his left foot, and the distance to the nearest chair. Then, I stopped myself. He had Melissa on one side and my mother on the other. If they wanted the title, they could carry the visible work that came with it. "Dana," my mother said, "we still have time to settle this privately. There is nothing private about a nomination that accuses me of harming Dad. You know what I mean." Melissa adjusted the garment bag. "You could tell them the dispute has been resolved." "It has not. Ethan thinks this has gone too far." Ethan saw Kelsey take my crutch. He saw a few seconds of confusion. So did 200 other people. My mother looked around the hallway, checking whether anyone could hear. "Must you say everything so loudly?" My voice had not risen. The fact that she treated clarity like shouting told me how accustomed she was to my lowering it. Robert moved closer. "If you walk into that room and attack your sister, do not expect to come back into my house." The threat had sounded larger over the phone. In person, it was a sentence spoken by a man who had signed his name beneath a lie and still believed the house in Henrico was the only place where I could belong. "I am not here to attack anyone," I said. "I am here to correct a record. You are here to punish Melissa because she was recognized." I asked for my name to be removed from a false accusation. My mother gripped her purse strap. "If Melissa loses this position, I will be left handling everything." The admission came in the hallway of the organization, honoring Melissa for supposedly handling everything. No one passing us would have understood what my mother had just revealed. I did. "You have the agency number," I said. "You have the medication instructions. Dad can choose a professional care manager. We cannot have strangers constantly coming into the house. Then you will need to share the work. Her lips parted. Before she could answer, the conference room door opened. A woman with gray braids and rectangular glasses introduced herself as Evelyn Carter, chair of the review panel. "This is a confidential proceeding," she said. "No recording is permitted. All health-related material must remain limited to the claims under review." Her gaze moved from me to my father. "Mr. Brooks, the Alliance requested limited verification from the home care agency under the consent you signed with the nomination. Do you still authorize us to consider the response?" Robert looked at Melissa. Then he faced Evelyn. "Yes?" He still believed the verification would protect them. "Thank you," Evelyn said. "Miss Brooks, we have also received your redacted documents and confirmed that the paper medication materials were provided to you during discharge teaching. Nothing from your employer's electronic systems has been submitted." "That is correct. Your workplace is not a party to this review. I understand. Any decision we make concerns only the nomination and our own records." Yes. The distinction mattered. This room could withdraw a trophy. It could not restore my hospital assignment, clear a workplace complaint, or order compliance to believe me. That part would remain mine to carry. Melissa moved toward the conference table. "We all understand the rules," she said. "Can we begin?" Her confidence might have unsettled me a week earlier. Now I noticed the garment bag lying across the back of her chair. She had already planned what she would wear after winning. Evelyn gestured toward the seats. "The primary question is whether the supporting record accurately represents the caregiving described in the nomination. The care calendar is the strongest document in the file, provided it was created at the time the events occurred." My fingers rested on the latches of the document case. Provided it was created at the time. That single condition held the door open. Melissa spoke first. She described taking responsibility after my father's stroke, coordinating therapy, and protecting my mother from exhaustion. Her voice softened at exactly the right places. "I never expected an award," she said. "I only wanted Dad to feel safe." My mother nodded. Across the table, Robert placed both hands over the head of his cane. "Melissa was the one who held us together," he said. "When things became difficult, she stayed." No one on the panel reacted. They took notes. Melissa continued. "She had managed medications," she said. "She had tracked appointments. She had maintained the calendar so every person involved in my father's care would know what needed to happen." A panelist named Daniel Cho turned to one of the submitted pages. "You list physical therapy visits with Renee Bouchard throughout the spring." "Yes," Melissa said. "How frequently did Miss Bouchard come to the home?" Melissa hesitated. "Usually twice a week." "Did she perform the mobility assessment referenced here?" "She was involved in most of his therapy planning." Daniel looked at the page again. "Could you clarify how she pronounced her last name? Our verification notes contain a different pronunciation than the one you used." Melissa's fingers tightened over the edge of the table. "I may be saying it wrong. We mostly communicated by email." Renee had never communicated with Melissa by email. I knew because I had been the person standing at the front door every Tuesday and Thursday, holding the binder, while Renee explained my father's progress. Still, I said nothing. One mispronounced name did not prove the calendar was false. It only showed that Melissa knew less about the routine than the document implied. When Evelyn invited my response, I opened the document case. "I am not asking this panel to decide which daughter loved our father more." Melissa released a quiet, dismissive breath. Evelyn looked at her until the sound stopped. "The nomination makes 3 factual claims about me," I continued. "It says I was rarely present, that I attempted a transfer without appropriate knowledge, and that Melissa assumed full responsibility afterward. I am challenging those claims and the calendar used to support them." "Because you want credit," Melissa said. "Miss Hale," Evelyn warned. My attention remained on the panel. Melissa did help in some ways. She brought meals. She attended several appointments. She handled some communication with relatives and community organizations. I am not saying she did nothing. That statement changed the room. My mother had been prepared to defend Melissa from total condemnation. I had not offered it. The calendar was opened on the screen, mounted to the wall. "Please look at the medications section for January," I said. The page showed a neat list in Melissa's chosen font. Daniel leaned forward. What should we notice? The order. No one spoke. Now compare February, March, and April. The pages changed one after another. The same medications appeared in the same sequence every month. Even the unusual spacing remained. Melissa folded her hands. Consistency is not evidence of wrongdoing. No. But the source of the consistency matters. From the binder, I removed the page labeled Current Meds. This page was kept at the front because it showed the medication list currently in use. Whenever a change occurred, I updated this sheet. Older versions remained behind monthly dividers. Evelyn examined the photocopy already provided. The nomination calendar does not include the words current medications. They were cropped from the photograph. Melissa sat straighter. That is speculation. I placed the April medication handout beside the January discharge list. The newer medication near the bottom of the calendar did not appear on the January paper instructions. It was added in April. Daniel looked from one page to another. Yet it appears in the nominee's January, February, and March entries. Yes, that could have been an administrative cleanup, Melissa said. I reorganized the information later so the committee could understand it. Evelyn's pen stopped. Your application identifies this as a contemporaneous calendar. It was based on contemporaneous information. Then it was reconstructed? Melissa glanced toward Robert. I made the pages easier to read. The calendar's authority had depended on it being a daily record created as the care occurred. Now she had admitted it was assembled later. Not enough to end the review. Enough to change the question. Daniel pointed toward the double circle beside one dose. What does this symbol mean? Melissa answered too quickly. It marks an important medication. That is not what it means, I said. Her head turned. The double circle means recheck after 2 hours. It is shorthand I began using after a professional update course in March. A copy of my training certificate was placed before the panel. It contained no information about my father, only the date and course content. The symbol appears in Melissa's February calendar, I continued, a month before I began using it. That does not mean she copied you, my mother said. Evelyn addressed her. Mrs. Brooks, you will have an opportunity to speak if the panel has questions. My mother pressed her lips together. The same misplaced initial appears in both records, I said. On the original page, a home care aide signed the line beneath the intended date. That happened because the boxes were narrow. The reconstructed calendar repeats the placement exactly, but identifies the initial as Melissa's. Daniel enlarged the image. The letter did not match the other initials Melissa had used. A small error. A human error. The kind no one would deliberately invent because it looked meaningless. That was why it mattered. Melissa's calendar had copied not only my structure, but the accidental marks created by real visits. Robert shifted in his chair. You always made that binder unnecessarily complicated, he said. Nobody could touch it without you correcting them. Every eye moved toward him. He continued, perhaps mistaking attention for agreement. She brought it into the house constantly. She hovered over every pill and appointment, as if the rest of us were incompetent. The words settled between us. Constantly. Every pill. Every appointment. My father had meant to diminish me. Instead, he had placed me in his home over and over again. Evelyn turned to the nomination. Mr. Brooks, this document states that Dana was seldom present. She came by. How often? I did not count. You just said she brought the binder constantly. His grip tightened on the cane. She made a production of everything she did. That is not the question, Evelyn said. Was she regularly present? Melissa leaned toward him. Dad, you do not have to answer that wording. I looked at Evelyn. Please include his statement in the review notes. It will be included. No one had rescued me. No one had exposed him with a dramatic accusation. Robert had stepped into the contradiction because he could not resist calling my diligence obsessive. His contempt for the skill he had relied upon became the first thing in the room he could not explain away. Evelyn opened a sealed response from the home care agency. Under the consent attached to the nomination, we requested verification concerning the scheduled visit on the date of Dana's injury. Anna sat behind me, hands folded in her lap. She did not speak. The panel had obtained the answer through its own process. A home care transfer, assistance visit was scheduled that evening, Evelyn read. It was canceled that morning by a caller identifying herself as the primary daughter caregiver. Melissa's face remained still. The caller stated that family would handle the transfer. My mother looked down at her purse. Evelyn continued. The agency identified the caller as Melissa Brooks, now Melissa Hale. That does not prove I caused Dana's injury, Melissa said. No one said it did, I replied. You are trying to make a normal scheduling change sound malicious. The nomination says you assumed full responsibility after I made an unsafe transfer. The agency record shows you canceled professional assistance before the transfer and represented yourself as the primary caregiver. I believed we could manage. Who was we? You were going to be there. The answer came before she could reshape it. Daniel looked up. If Dana was rarely involved, why did canceling professional assistance depend on her being present? Melissa's jaw tightened. She had agreed to help. Then she was part of the care plan that day. She inserted herself into everything. My mother's voice carried from the far side of the table. She always did. The phrases were different versions of my father's argument. I was absent when credit was assigned. I was everywhere when blame was needed. The panel moved to the incident at the wedding. Evelyn summarized Thomas's statement and the venue report. Then she played only the portion of Kelsey's publicly posted video relevant to the fall. There was my hand beneath Robert's elbow. My weight shifting. Kelsey approaching from behind. The crutch moving out of frame. My body dropping. No music. No caption. No explanation from Melissa about blood sugar. Just the sequence. My mother stared at the screen. She was able to stand afterward. Yes, I said. Thomas's statement explains that brief weight bearing does not mean the mobility aid was unnecessary. You looked fine in the restroom, Melissa said. You were not in the restroom. Kelsey saw you. Kelsey also told the guests I had low blood sugar. Then she told them I was pretending. Which version did you put in the complaint? The question reached farther than the video. Melissa looked toward the panel. This has become a personal attack. No, I said. It has become a comparison between claims. Evelyn closed the video window. The panel is not determining liability for the fall. We are determining whether the nomination accurately represents the caregiving record. She turned to Robert. Did Dana receive the discharge teaching concerning your medication and home mobility? He looked toward my mother. Evelyn repeated the question. Yes, he said. Did Melissa attend that teaching? I do not remember. She did not, I said. You cannot speak for everyone, my mother snapped. I can speak to who was in the hospital room with me. Robert's cane struck lightly against the floor. This is exactly what I meant. Dana turns every act of help into proof that someone owes her. I could have argued. Instead, I opened the nomination and read the sentence, describing me as rarely available. Then I placed his email and my written summary of our call beside it. During our conversation yesterday, Dad said Melissa did not know the medication schedule. That was taken out of context, he said. What was the context? You were threatening to abandon us. I was ending unpaid, unscheduled duties after learning you had signed a statement saying someone else performed them. My mother's voice dropped. So you admit you were punishing him? No. I arranged a safe boundary. The agency number was provided. The written medication instructions remained in the house. Dad still had the right to select professional support. Strangers are not the same as a daughter. Neither is a daughter the same as an unlimited service. The room went quiet again. This time, the quiet did not feel like the one at the wedding. There, everyone had waited for my relatives to explain me. Here, they were waiting for me to finish. I am not asking to be named Caregiver of the Year, I said. I am not asking the Alliance to decide who deserves affection. The nomination says I was absent. Dad just confirmed I repeatedly brought the binder, tracked medications, and attended to appointments. The calendar says it was created month by month. Melissa has acknowledged reorganizing it later, and it contains a current medication list copied backward into months when that list did not exist. The nomination says Melissa assumed full responsibility after an unsafe transfer. The agency record shows she canceled professional help before that transfer, and expected me to cover it. Melissa looked at me with an expression I could not name. Anger was there. Something else might have been fear or disbelief. I did not need to decide. "What do you want?" Evelyn asked. The question sounded different from Anna's version in the coffee shop. Anna had asked what outcome I needed. Evelyn was asking what action belonged within this room. "I want the nomination withdrawn," I said. "I want the statement saying I was rarely present and caused harm through lack of knowledge corrected in the Alliance record. And I want a written decision explaining that the supporting record was found unreliable." Daniel glanced at the hospital complaint summary. "Are you asking us to contact your employer?" "No. My employer is conducting its own review. This organization has no authority over that process." Melissa looked up sharply. "I will submit your written decision myself as additional evidence," I continued. "Compliance can decide what weight to give it." The distinction felt like laying a final stone into place. No borrowed authority. No committee reaching beyond its role. No convenient institution finishing the work for me. Evelyn folded her hands. "There may be an alternative." I waited. "The panel could amend the wording concerning your involvement while allowing Melissa's nomination to proceed without the disputed calendar." My mother exhaled as if a door had opened. Melissa's shoulders lowered. My father looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. The offer would give me part of what I had asked for. My name would be cleared in the Alliance record. Melissa could keep the possibility of receiving the award. The wedding photographs, community praise, and speeches could remain intact. All I had to do was accept a solution that admitted the lie, but preserved its reward. For most of my life, that was what fairness had looked like in our house. A private correction for me. A public celebration for Melissa. "No," I said. My mother's chair scraped against the floor. "Dana." The nomination was not supported by one poorly worded sentence. The calendar, the caregiving description, and the accusation against me were used together to present Melissa as the sole reliable caregiver. "She cared for him emotionally," my mother said. "Then the nomination should have said that." "You want to destroy her." "I want the record to stop using my work as evidence of hers." Melissa's voice became low. "You cannot stand the idea that something good happened to me. I am not asking for the trophy. Because you know they would never give it to you." The insult reached for the old place inside me, the place where recognition had always seemed scarce, where one daughter's praise meant another daughter had to disappear. It found nothing useful. "I did not come here to take your trophy," I said. "I came because my work is not material you get to melt down and cast into one." No one interrupted. Evelyn looked at each panel member. "We will recess to consider the record." The panel left through a side door. As soon as it closed, my mother stood. "I hope you are proud of yourself." The words had followed nearly every boundary I had ever tried to set. "I am proud that I did not use confidential records, exaggerate the evidence, or ask anyone to decide this for me. Listen to yourself. You sound like you are at work. That is where you tried to damage me." My father pushed himself upright with his cane. Melissa reached toward his arm. He waved her away. "You have made your choice," he said. "No." I responded to yours. "I signed what I believed. You signed that I was rarely present. You were difficult every time you came. Then I came." His mouth tightened. "You always need the last word." "No, I needed the first accurate one." He turned away. My mother moved after him, then stopped in front of me. "What happens to us now?" The question carried no concern about our relationship. It meant medication, transfers, evenings. The work she had expected to fall back into my hands once the review ended. "A care manager will help Dad build a schedule," I said. "We cannot afford someone every night. Then responsibilities will need to be divided. Kelsey is too busy." Melissa applied for an award based on doing them. My mother stared at me. Behind her, the garment bag remained draped over Melissa's chair. The panel returned 23 minutes later. I knew because I had watched the second hand circle the conference room clock. Everyone sat. Evelyn opened a single-page decision. "The panel finds that the care calendar was not maintained contemporaneously as represented, and that material portions appear to have been reconstructed from records created by Dana Brooks." Melissa's face did not change. The panel further finds that the nomination contains inaccurate statements regarding Dana Brooks's presence, responsibilities, and role in the transfer incident. My father looked at the table. The home care verification confirms that professional assistance was canceled by the nominee on the date in question. The submitted record does not reliably support the claim that Melissa Hale assumed full caregiving responsibility after an isolated failure by Dana Brooks. Evelyn placed the paper flat. The nomination is withdrawn from consideration. My mother made a small sound. The Alliance will remove the finalist profile from its website and provide Dana Brooks with a written correction and the formal result of this review. Any other organization may conduct its own evaluation under its own procedures. Melissa's hand moved toward the garment bag, then stopped. So that is it? She asked. For this nomination, yes. You are treating minor documentation errors as dishonesty. We are treating a reconstructed calendar as reconstructed, Evelyn said. We are treating statements contradicted by the supporting record as inaccurate. Melissa turned toward me. Are you satisfied? A week earlier, I might have imagined this moment, ending with triumph. It did not. The pressure in my chest eased, but nothing about my father's signature became less painful. Satisfaction was not the goal, I said. The correction was. You humiliated me. The review was confidential. The ceremony is tomorrow. Everyone will know. They will know you are not receiving the award. Because of you. Because the documents did not support the nomination. My father stood. You have torn this family apart over paperwork. The sentence might have sounded powerful if the paperwork had not contained his own choices. I did not create the contradictions, I said. I stopped carrying them for you. He walked toward the door. My mother followed, but before leaving, she looked back. Who is going to help us tonight? I took the care manager's card from my wallet and placed it on the table. Call this number. You expect me to explain everything to a stranger? Yes. She left the card where it was. Melissa picked up the garment bag. For 1 second, our eyes met. No apology came. None was required for me to leave. Anna remained seated until the others disappeared into the hallway. Do you need someone to walk you to your car? She asked. I can manage. All right. I stood, adjusted the crutch, and took 1 step. Then another. Anna moved beside me, not touching my arm. Walking beside me is fine, I said. Her answer was quiet. I know. In the hallway, my phone displayed a new email from the Alliance. The written decision was attached. My first impulse was to forward it to Leah without explanation. Instead, I sat on a bench outside the elevator and opened a new message. The subject line read, Supplemental material for open, fact-finding review. The message contained 5 sentences. The Alliance had withdrawn Melissa's nomination. Its panel found the calendar had been reconstructed and the statements about my involvement inaccurate. The Alliance had no authority over the hospital. I was submitting the result only as additional evidence. Compliance should complete its own evaluation using the audit log, my training records, and the materials already provided. The decision was attached. I pressed send. No one had carried it to the hospital for me. No organization had ordered my employer to clear my name. I had taken the result from one room, identified what it proved, and placed it into the next process under my own signature. The elevator opened. Before stepping inside, I looked back through the glass door of the Alliance office. The garment bag was gone. The trophy remained somewhere inside, waiting for another name. It would never carry Melissa's. Several weeks passed before compliance completed its review. The delay was frustrating enough to be believable. My reassignment continued. Mark delivered the transfer workshop using my presentation. The project leadership position did not return to me after the schedule had been reorganized. That loss stayed. Winning one dispute did not rewind every consequence. Leah called me into the same conference room where I had signed the audit authorization. A letter rested between us. Information security found no access to your father's records under your credentials, she said. Your training history contradicts the allegation that you lacked transfer knowledge. The Alliance decision undermines the credibility of the statement used to support the complaint. She pushed the letter across the table. Compliance has closed the matter without corrective action. The words were plain. No applause. No dramatic apology from the hospital. A process had ended because the evidence did not support the accusation. My hand stayed on the paper. What about the live education duties? You may resume them immediately. And the project? Mark will complete the current cycle. Too much has been reassigned to reverse it without disrupting patient scheduling. A trace of disappointment crossed my face before I could hide it. Leah did not pretend not to notice. There is another opportunity, she said. We are developing a module about boundaries, informed consent and caregiver role clarity during discharge planning. That sounds as if it was created because of this case. The idea was influenced by gaps this situation exposed. You would not discuss your personal story. You would build the educational content. Would I lead it? Yes. The offer was not compensation for being mistreated. It was work based on a skill I had demonstrated. I want the scope and decision authority in writing. Leah smiled. There you are. I never left. No. You stopped apologizing for being here. I accepted after reading the written proposal. The care manager contacted me that same week. My father had selected professional coordination rather than activating any power of attorney. He remained fully capable of making his own decisions. The manager asked whether I intended to stay listed as the primary family contact. No, I said. Would you be willing to attend one transition meeting? Yes, one meeting, for information transfer only. Do you have documents we should review? I have copies of the paper instructions, appointment history, and the binder I maintained. Bring what you are comfortable sharing. The meeting took place at my parents' house on a Wednesday afternoon. My key no longer opened the front door. Robert had changed the lock, or had the cylinder rekeyed. I did not ask which. The care manager let me in after my mother failed to answer the bell. Boxes of medication sat on the kitchen counter. A printed weekly schedule had been taped to the refrigerator. My mother stood beside it, with her arms crossed. This is far too complicated. It is the same information that was there before, I said. It looks different, because someone else organized it. Robert sat at the table. Melissa was not present. I knew from a public notice on the Alliance website that her finalist profile had been removed. A later email from the Caregiver Coalition confirmed she had stepped down from her representative role while they reviewed the accuracy of her public biography. No one had told me why she chose to step down. I did not invent an answer. The care manager reviewed each responsibility. Medication preparation would be handled through pharmacy blister packs. An aide would assist with evening transfers several times a week. My mother would learn the alarm system and emergency procedures. Robert would choose which therapy appointments to continue. When the form reached the line marked Primary Family Caregiver, the manager turned it toward me. My name had been typed there in advance. Did Dad request that? I asked. It carried over from the previous contact sheet. I drew one line through my name. Please leave it blank until someone consents to the role. My mother stared at the form. You are really doing this? Yes. After everything, you are walking away. I am completing the transition I promised. You know your father trusts you more than strangers. Robert looked at the window. The statement could have been true. It did not create an obligation. Trust without honesty is not a care plan, I said. The manager did not comment. She simply updated the document. I handed over a duplicate binder containing the current instructions, appointment list, and relevant notes. The original remained in my document case. My father finally spoke. You could come back if you stopped dragging the past behind you. There was no correction, no acknowledgement of the nomination, no recognition that the past had reached into my workplace only weeks earlier. You can contact me after you send a written correction of what you signed, I said. Any relationship after that will still require boundaries. So you need me to beg. No, I need you to take responsibility. What if I refuse? Then the boundary remains. My mother shook her head. You will regret being this rigid. Maybe. The answer startled her. For years, I had defended every decision as if uncertainty made it invalid. It did not. I could grieve the distance later. I could question myself at night. I could miss my father and still refuse to return to a role built on erasure. The care manager continued through the schedule. When the meeting ended, my mother did not walk me to the door. Robert did not ask me to stay. Outside, the new key turned in the lock behind me. My hand paused on the railing. The sound once would have felt like exile. This time, it marked the end of an unpaid shift. 3 months later, I returned to the Alliance building. The wall beside the elevator had been rearranged. A blank space remained where the current award recipient's photograph would eventually hang. Melissa's name appeared nowhere. I did not stop to study the absence. The conference room across the hall had been opened for a public workshop. Hospital discharge planners, home care coordinators, and relatives of older adults filled the chairs. Anna sat in the second row. Leah stood near the back. Neither of them had introduced me, built the course for me, or decided that I should be there. My name had been printed on the sign outside because I had written the proposal, developed the materials, and agreed to teach it. Dana Brooks. Care planning without family exploitation. The blue binder rested on the table beside my notes. My crutch leaned openly against the chair. There had been a time when Kelsey believed taking it away would expose me as weak. Instead, the space where it had been became the point where every hidden arrangement started showing. The medication schedule, the canceled aid, the reconstructed calendar, the complaint created before the wedding, the signature my father had chosen to give. My knees still stiffened after long days. Some damage required patience rather than a victorious ending. The room settled. A woman in the front row adjusted the notebook on her lap. Behind her, a man whispered that he had taken over his mother's appointments because no one else would help. Their stories were not mine. That was why the first sentence mattered. I placed both hands on the table and looked at the people who had come to learn how care could be shared without consuming one person. A care plan is not a plan, I said, if it only works by making one daughter disappear.